unto my feet, and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. When I feel afraid, think I've lost my way, still you're there right beside me. Nothing will I fear as long as you are near. Please be near me to the end. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. You're the light unto my path.
Hello and welcome to Sound Words. Sound Words is the theme that has been selected as a course of study for the Church Street Church of Christ this year. It is based upon some words that Paul writes to Timothy. Therefore, do not be ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, nor of me his prisoner, but share with me in the sufferings for the gospel, according to the power of God, to which I was appointed a preacher, an apostle, and a teacher of the Gentiles. Hold fast the pattern of sound words which you have heard from me, in faith and love which are in Christ Jesus. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8, 11, and 13. In keeping with this theme, then, of sound words, this program is simply a Bible study. How better to discern sound words than to listen to the Word Himself, Jesus the Christ? So we are using this weekly time slot to simply study the Bible together. We are studying the Gospel of John. I hope that you will continue to tune in at this time each week to participate in this fascinating study. I hope you have your Bible ready so that you can follow along and possibly even take notes along the way so that you can prepare yourself for even deeper study on a personal level. In our study today, we're going to continue to look at some background information that is going to be very helpful to us in our understanding of the text whenever we get ready to dive into the text of the Gospel of John. I want to remind you of a couple of things that we talked about last week in our time together that are critically important as we continue to plod through some of this background material. The most important thing that I want to call to your attention from last week's study is that John has what we're going to call a thesis statement that is found in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. And recall that as we looked at this thesis statement, John is not only describing his purpose for writing this letter, but he's also introducing us to what we are calling the three key words of John's Gospel. We went over these three key words in our last meeting together. The three key words of John's Gospel are, number 1, signs, number 2, believe, and number 3, life. You can find all three of these key words in the thesis statement, so it starts to come together and make a lot of sense for us. Let's read John's thesis statement together again in John chapter 20, starting in verse 30. And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So it becomes pretty evident that John is letting us know from the outset that there are many things Jesus does that he is not going to use the time or space to write about. But he's going to be very selective in the signs that he describes. Again, remember that John uses the word signs to describe miraculous events, because John sees these miraculous events as bigger than the event itself, as more than something that's just supernatural, but actually a sign that is pointing to some characteristic or quality of Jesus that he wants his readers to notice. It is John's conviction that with these limited signs that he records, there will be enough information that points to qualities or characteristics of Jesus' nature and character that will be enough there to instill a further and a deeper belief in those that read or hear these words. John wants to make sure that he reintroduces Jesus. He wants to show these signs that are performed so that it will instill in the hearer belief, a different level of belief, a belief that goes deeper, one that requires a deeper conviction from the reader. John wants to take even those who are already believing in Jesus to a new experience, to a deeper level of belief, one that is life-changing, which leads us to his third key word, life. And again, I want to remind us that John is not content to just have an ordinary kind of existence. He's not talking about that kind of life. He's talking about a life that is full, a life that has zest, a life that has purpose, a life that is deep. And so that's why we read in John's Gospel, in John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus himself saying, "I have come that they might have life, and that they might live it to the full, or that they might live it more abundantly." The idea there is this Greek word zoe, which is talking about purpose to life, depth to life. And so that's John's purpose. You weave together these three key words, not just in the thesis statement, but throughout the telling of the story, and we'll see as we get into the text, he'll talk again and again about signs that lead one to believe in Jesus as the Son of God, and when they believe and act upon that belief, they will experience life. That is his purpose as stated in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. Now, John does say in this thesis statement that there are many signs that Jesus performed that he is not going to write about. John is convinced that he can tell the story of Jesus with just 7 signs, that those are the only ones that are needed to instill this belief in the reader. Now, John is going to understand that there are many, many more signs that he could write about, but they are not needed to establish his purpose. As we look at the signs, there are going to be 7 recorded by John's Gospel. Now, we are not counting the resurrection of Jesus, which in itself is a great miraculous event, but it is not a specific sign Jesus is performing in order to teach something about his nature. So prior to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, as John tells his story, he's going to use 7 signs to tell the story and point to some quality about Jesus. So I want to rehearse with you those 7 signs before we even start reading the text, because we need to be watching for them as they occur. The 7 signs that John records communicating something about Jesus' power or Jesus' mastery over life are these. Number 1, the first sign that Jesus performs is found in John chapter 2, where Jesus attends a wedding feast and changes water to wine. We're going to see as we read that text that Jesus not only changes water into wine, but that the master of the feast on that occasion says, What's going on here? This is not just any kind of wine. This is the very best wine. As a matter of fact, the steward of that feast is confused because he says most people will serve their best wine first, and then after people have had some to drink and their senses have been dulled a little bit, then they bring out inferior wine. But in this case, at the wedding feast, after the wine had run out, Jesus turns water into wine, but it's not just some sort of run-of-the-mill kind of wine. Even the master of the feast says, "This is the very best wine." John is using Jesus' first sign in Cana of Galilee, turning water into wine, to point to show us something about Jesus and his mastery over quality. Whatever Jesus does is going to be the highest quality. That's the point John wants us, his readers, to get. He wants us to see that with Jesus, we always get the very best quality. The second sign John is going to record is going to be found in John chapter 4. It is the second sign that Jesus performs. On this occasion, there is a nobleman who comes to Jesus wanting Jesus to heal his sick son. But Jesus doesn't go with him to his house to do the healing. Jesus simply speaks the word, and this young boy is healed. The interesting thing about this miracle that John wants to make sure that the reader understands is that it's not just a miracle. It's not just a supernatural event, but it is a sign that shows us something about Jesus. What does it show us about Jesus? Well, when we read the story, we start to see that this is a sign because Jesus is some 20 miles removed from the person he heals. When the nobleman gets home, he gets word that his son is healed, and he asks about the time when this healing occurred and is able to deduce in his own mind that it occurred right when Jesus spoke those words. So when Jesus was 20 miles away from the sick boy, he is still able to heal him. John is using this as a sign, not simply to show Jesus' amazing power, but to show Jesus is master over distance. It doesn't matter how far away this boy was, Jesus has the power to overcome any distance. So Jesus turns water to wine, which shows his mastery over quality. Jesus heals a nobleman's son from 20 miles away to show he's master over distance. In chapter 5, we see the third sign recorded by John, and this is the healing of the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. Here is a man who's been lame for 38 years. Imagine that. 38 years unable to walk. And Jesus asks the man if he wants to be healed, which seems like a strange question. And when we get into the text, we'll deal with that a little bit more specifically. But here's a person who's been in this condition for 38 years, and yet when he meets Jesus, Jesus heals him and gives him the ability to walk. John wants us to see not just the healing, but he wants us to see something about Jesus. Therefore, this healing is a sign that shows that Jesus is master over time. It doesn't matter how long a person has been in the condition he is in, Jesus can still overcome, and Jesus can still be victorious. So the healing of the lame man at the pool in John chapter 5 is the third sign recorded by Jesus, and it shows Jesus is master over time. The fourth sign that John records is one that is unique in that it is the only sign recorded by all four of the gospel writers. Now, you remember earlier we had talked about the fact that each of the gospel writers is telling the story of Jesus. Some of them are eyewitnesses, some are not, but each of them are writing to a different audience at a different time for a different purpose, accomplishing a different goal. And each one of them is going to emphasize different things about Jesus, things that he taught, things that he said, things that he did. The only miracle or sign that is recorded in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is the feeding of the 5,000. You find it in John chapter 6. But when John tells the story, he's not content with the reader just seeing Jesus doing something supernaturally amazing. He wants the reader to see the sign. The feeding of the 5,000 with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish is a sign, John says, that shows us that Jesus is master over quantity. There were 5,000 men fed, plus women and children. Maybe a crowd of over 12,000 people with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. Jesus is master over quantity. The 5th miracle or sign that John records is Jesus walking on the water, which is also found in John chapter 6. This is an amazing event, obviously. This is not something that anyone would expect. It is not possible, is it, for a human being to walk on the surface of the water, and yet Jesus performs this sign. But even here, when the disciples are amazed that Jesus is walking on the water, the point John is making is not the miracle, the supernatural event. He wants the reader to see and to learn something about Jesus, that Jesus is master even over nature or over natural law. He can overcome nature or natural law. The 6th sign that John records is found in John chapter 9. In this one, he devotes an entire chapter to the healing of the man who was born blind. The whole chapter deals with the transformation of this blind man, not only in a physical way, where he was once unable to see anything physically, but also a transformation from spiritual blindness to spiritual sight. And some great figurative language, especially near the end of that chapter, is used, and I can't wait for us to get into John chapter 9 and talk about that event more specifically. But once again, John is not content with us just seeing a blind man healed. He wants us to see that this is a sign that shows that Jesus is master over misfortune. This is no one's fault. Jesus clears that up from the beginning of chapter 9. It is not the blind man's parents' fault. It is not the blind man's fault. These are just unfortunate events. He is a victim of misfortune, and yet Jesus is able to overcome and show his mastery over misfortune by giving sight to this man who was born blind. And then the 7th sign we're going to be looking at John describing is found in John chapter 11. This is the dramatic scene where Jesus raises a very dear friend, Lazarus, from the dead. The story is about dear friends Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Lazarus gets sick. Word is sent to Jesus, but by the time Jesus comes, Lazarus has already been dead 4 days. But Jesus is still able to roll the stone away and call for Lazarus to come out of the grave. So Lazarus is raised to life again. A very dramatic and, yes, supernatural miracle. But John wants us to see beyond the miracle itself. He wants the readers to see that this shows Jesus to be master over death. Now, I've gone through kind of quickly those 7 signs that John records. But again, I want to remind us that John suggests that all the reader needs to know about Jesus to establish the kind of belief that leads to life with meaning is these 7 signs. They show Jesus to be master over quality, master over distance, master over time, master over quantity, master over natural law, master over misfortune, and master over death. I believe these are things that we would be well served to commit to memory, to try to remember the chapters and the events where Jesus performs a sign in John's Gospel, because while having a conversation with anyone about the Bible, these can be useful tools to help us to establish belief or even a deeper belief in those with whom we talk about Jesus and His Word. Again, these are the 7 signs: changing water to wine, John chapter 2 shows Jesus to be master over quality. Healing the nobleman's son in John chapter 4 shows Jesus to be master over distance. Healing the lame man in John chapter 5 shows Jesus to be master over time. Feeding the 5,000 in John chapter 6 shows Jesus to be master over quantity. Walking on the water in John chapter 6 shows Jesus to be master over natural law. Healing the blind man in John chapter 9 shows Jesus to be master over misfortune. And raising Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 11 shows Jesus to be master over death. Now here's why those things are important. I want you to pause with me for just a moment and think about the excuses that people sometimes make about why they're not following Jesus. Maybe some excuses that we ourselves have used or fallen back on from time to time. Sometimes people will say, I'm not a very good person. I struggle in my life and I know I'm not anywhere near what I ought to be. And so really it's too late for me. There's just nothing for me in Christian living. And we're reminded that with the turning of water into wine in John chapter 2, Jesus shows that he's master over quality. He can turn a life into the very best kind of life, as we've already seen in our looking at John chapter 10, verse 10. When a person says, I've drifted too far, it's been too long since I've worshiped God, or too long since I've attended an assembly of the church, I've just drifted away too far and there's no hope for me, we can be reminded that Jesus, in healing the nobleman's son from 20 miles away, shows that he's master over distance, that there is no distance that's too great for Jesus to overcome. He can bring us back. He can heal us. He can restore the relationship no matter how distant it has become. Sometimes people say, well, it's been a long time since I've ever been even remotely faithful. Sometimes people say things like this: if I ever walked into the building of a church, the walls would collapse, implying that it's just been so long that it's not possible to turn one's life around. We can be reminded that Jesus healed a lame man who had been in that condition for 38 years, and by doing so shows that he's master over time. There is no time that is too great for Jesus to overcome. It doesn't matter how long a person may have been away from him. Jesus is master over time. He's master over quantity. He's master over natural law. Sometimes bad events in life, hurricanes or tornadoes or some sort of natural disaster, has caused devastation to certain people's lives, and it has driven them away from God rather than bringing them closer. And we can be reminded that Jesus is master even over natural laws. He demonstrates by walking on the water. Sometimes people just have misfortune in life, maybe a handicap, maybe something that has inexplicably happened in life that has caused them to be inhibited in some way, or caused them to be prevented in their own mind from being able to have the ability to serve God. In such a case, we can be reminded that Jesus healed a blind man who had been blind his entire life from birth. And Jesus makes it very clear, this is just a misfortune. This is just an unfortunate event. It's no one's fault. It's not something that someone could have controlled, but Jesus can overcome even our misfortune. Sometimes it's death that drives people away from God rather than closer to Him. The death of a spouse, the death of a loved one, someone who's close, and that relationship has been severed by death, and people begin to question God. Where is God when I need Him the most? Why would God allow such a thing to happen to me? If God is real, and if God is good, then why did my loved one pass from this life when I needed him or her so much? And that wedge then becomes a greater gap. People allow that death to push them farther from God. But in reality, it's at the time of death that we ought to be drawn closer. And John wants his readers to see that Jesus is master over death. He calls Lazarus out of the grave. And later we're going to see the most important event of all of history when Jesus himself is resurrected from the dead on that first day of the week, when the stone is rolled away and the tomb is found empty. Those are not just historical events. John wants us to see beyond the event, to see that a very important message is being told. A very important story is here in his gospel that John believes can change life. So when you put these 7 signs together, changing water to wine, master over quality. Healing the nobleman's son, master over distance. Healing the lame man, master over time. Feeding the 5,000, master over quantity. Walking on water, master over natural law. Healing the blind man, master over misfortune. Raising Lazarus from the dead, master over death. We see that signs can lead us to believe in Jesus as the Son of God, and believing we can have life in his name. And remember, that's John's purpose for writing from the very beginning. That's what he stated for us in his mission statement or in his purpose statement. This is what he wants his readers to see. He wants to introduce them to not only the historical Jesus, but the very practical Jesus, the Jesus who they can know in a very personal way, the Jesus who can have a personal relationship even with us today, and by so doing can transform us into his likeness, can give us the ability to live a life that has purpose, to give us the ability to live a life that has meaning, and we can walk day by day with our head held high, with a spring in our step, knowing that we belong to Christ, and his life, his death, his resurrection is what gives us purpose and meaning. Thank you for studying with me today. I hope you'll be with me again soon. You have been listening to Sound Words, a presentation of the Church Street Church of Christ in Lewisburg, Tennessee. I am Kyle Bolton, the pulpit minister at Church Street, and I would like to personally invite you to come and share times of Bible study and worship with us each week. We meet every Sunday at 9 o'clock a.m. for our morning worship, followed by our Sunday school for all ages at 10:15 a.m. Then we meet again at 6 o'clock p.m. for our evening worship. We also have a midweek meeting for devotion and Bible study on Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. I hope to see you there. Have a blessed day.
Holy words, long preserved for our walk in this world, they resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart, words of life, words of hope, give us strength, help us cope in this world where'er we roam. Ancient words will guide us home. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart, holy words of our faith, handed down to this age, came to us through sacrifice. Oh, heed the faithful words of Christ, holy words, long preserved for our walk in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart, ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart.